Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Yagboa, and welcome back to our webinar series, Now and Next, How the Church is Changing for Good. Before we actually launch into this wonderful information that we have for you this day, we think it's important not only to recognize the presence of God, but to be present to God and to one another. And so I'm going to invite us into a centering and grounding exercise that this might be a time that we can invite God to help us turn this information that we are going to hear about today into a means of transformation. And so I'm just going to invite you wherever you are, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes. Maybe you can place your feet on the ground. And if you have anything in your hands that you might let go of that thing, that you can be totally kind of available in this moment. And I want to ask you these two questions. The first is this: where do you feel like you're experiencing lack in life? What feels scarce or like it's not enough? Might you name those places before God? And here's the second question. What do you want or need from God in this moment? What is the image of God that reminds you of God's abundance? That the arm of the Lord is not too short? Might you find the courage with the mouth of your hearts to whisper that thing to God? Is it more mercy? Is it more grace? Is it to see God's provision made known in your life in tangible ways? Do not be afraid to whisper those things to God. And in our letting go, we also trust that God's exchange rate is always better and that God gives to each and every one of us good gifts. May it be so. So in today's webinar, we are bringing together panelists to discuss the number one anxiety that we found in our survey when we kind of curated statistics from over 1,000 church leaders. And that number one anxiety was around financial insecurity. That insecurity kind of was two-pronged or twofold. The first was churches being worried about kind of internally if they'll be able to pay their mortgages or their bills or even keep up with people's salaries. The second kind of financial insecurity was around kind of the ways in which our finances have impact beyond the four walls of the church. You know, can we continue to support our community partners? Can we continue to have community impact if we find that giving has gone down? And so we just want you to know this, as we're going to be talking today about kind of this two-pronged anxiety that we have around our finances, that there will be some notes that we will have available for you on amplifymedia.com/now and next, just so that you don't have to be furiously writing down notes, and that you can also look at the previous episodes that we have had in this webinar series, but also to find the resources that are going to be shared during this particular conversation. And so I'm happy to introduce our panelists today that are going to help us kind of have this conversation and kind of anchor us as we talk about this anxiety in our lives as church leaders. And so I want to introduce to you Tom Berlin.
Hey, Lisa, it's great to be here. I'm Tom Berlin, I'm the lead pastor at Flourish United Methodist Church. We're located in Herndon, Virginia, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. We're about 5 minutes from Dulles Airport, to give you our context. We're a multi-site congregation. I'm really excited about the topic. I've written 2 books on Christian stewardship. One is Defying Gravity, which is used in local churches to help people think about just the transformative nature of giving and generosity. And another is called The Generous Church. It's to help congregational leaders think through encouraging a generous life broadly and the importance of that if we're going to help people transform in Christ.
Good to have you with us. We're also really glad to have with us Rosario Picardo.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I serve as the Dean of the Chapel at United Theological Seminary, Director of our Leadership Center there, but also as a church planter. I've planted 3 churches and more recently Mosaic Church. And I've worked at different levels, small, medium, and large size churches. And through my experiences, I wrote a book called Funny Ministry, 5 Loaves, 2 Fishes, which sounds familiar. And also a book called Ministry Makeover, which is about bivocational ministry. And that was actually what my dissertation was on, based on the trends that we saw even a few years ago. And so I'm just grateful to share some of my experiences and mistakes that I've made throughout my ministry time.
And we also have fundraising expert Tricia Rosevear.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So I am the co-founder and CMO of ZoomGive. ZoomGive is a mobile fundraising platform, but my background is I've got about 25 plus years or so in branding, marketing, and consumer insights, working with corporate brands and consumer brands. But the last 7 years, really on the nonprofit side, which is where this whole thing all starts, with one of the largest radio stations and helping lead branding, marketing, and strategy there. And a few years ago, started a nonprofit called Give Hope Love. And in the course of that, decided to build technology that we would make available because we really wanted to help churches and nonprofits. So that leads us here today.
Yeah. Well, friends, as our pastor friends and church leaders shared in this survey around this anxiety around financial insecurity, we are in a historic period of loss, whether it be financial loss or even personal loss. We have individuals within our congregations and communities who find themselves really living in a fragile and a tender place. And so I think it's important for us to maybe start with the fear or the anxiety that pastors are feeling around not wanting to be insensitive to ask folks to give more during the season. I found myself even struggling to invite people into the offering moment the first couple of Sundays during quarantine. And so I would love to just ask you all, how do you ask for more from people who are hurting, specifically around their giving?
I would say just starting off, whether it's a pandemic like we're experiencing now or ways that we experienced church in the past, it all comes down to casting a compelling vision. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have to be afraid to cast a vision that's sharing God's preferred future. And so for my church, we exist to become a dynamic mosaic of Jesus followers. So how do we live that out here and now, and how have we lived that out before? And so casting a vision really during the offering time and other times is showing how their dollars are at work right now, that it's more than just paying a light bill or more than just paying a mortgage, but what do those things do? How staff is ministry. Mm-hmm. So when we have staff that we're paying, we know that staff are equipping other people in ministry. So casting that compelling vision is, I think, the first step before you go into more the nuts and the bolts of the how and feeling anxious, because this topic of money is something that pastors have always felt anxious about. Mm-hmm. And now it's amplified because of the needs that we see in our country and in our world. So the first thing I would say is vision.
I really agree with that. I think when I do talks about giving, stewardship, generosity, clergy always meet me in those spaces to it and just say it's a huge reluctance of mine. And many will say, I just won't do it. I won't talk about money. And what I would say is, you may have been okay in the past with that approach, but it is simply not going to work in this environment. Mm-hmm. And I would also say, I don't ask people for more money right now. I'm not asking for more. What I am doing is our church is giving you an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And the opportunity we're giving, while a lot of people are hurting, there are many people that want to help people that are hurting. Mm-hmm. And that's the opportunity that we open to them. So we've created a COVID-19 relief fund that's a separate fund from our general fund. And what we've done is we've said, please don't take from the general fund, which is helping us give you discipleship resources. It's creating a worship service. We're helping them see what that does. But this COVID-19 fund, and I said, some of you have said that in your generosity, you're going to give your stimulus check to that. Well, once that idea got out, a lot of people saw that as something that they could easily do. So we've seen this COVID-19 fund increase dramatically week after week. And then once a week, we share a big win out of that fund. So last week, we gave $10,000 to a shelter for abused women because, unfortunately, that's a problem that's on the rise. They're having to use hotel rooms because of the shelter-in-place orders. And people just celebrate. Each week, we are showing how we do that, and we've created focal areas around that. So one of those is food scarcity. Our building has turned into a food distribution center. We do it all with the safe protocols. But I think what you just heard Rosario say is so important. You've got to create a compelling vision and then say, if you'd like to join that opportunity, now's the time.
Right.
To go along with what Tom said, we've done the same thing. We've started a COVID-19 fund. And again, we don't want people to switch from their general giving to just give to this fund, but we've seen it grow as well. And I've taken a little bit of a different approach with it. We're helping to meet the needs first within our congregation. And so I've actually invited folks, if they're struggling or if they know anybody struggling within the household of faith, those that are in our congregation, to let us know. And so we've been able to get cars for people, a new stove just yesterday, things like that. And I'm posting it in our church Facebook group. So then folks are seeing their dollars at work. Hey, this is who we are, and this is what we do. But yeah, like Tom shared, there are many churches that are doing those types of things, and they have not seen giving drop. In fact, they've seen an uptick in giving.
Right. What we know, especially on being at a radio station it's listener supported, very similar to that congregation supported, is that giving, I agree with you, does go up during a recession or during a hard time. And specifically because those that can give want to give more, and those that can't want to do something. I might not be able to do this anymore in my life, but I can still give whatever, $5, $10. So that it really is an opportunity. But if the ask isn't made, we've had so many people go, well, I've only given this much because no one ever asked or really said they needed more. And so it really is the time to not be shy about asking. And I love what you guys are saying, and that transparency, give to keep the lights on isn't good enough anymore. The engagement that people want to feel part of a mission, so that when you're giving to our church, you're giving through our church to the community, is the messaging now that's really resonating with the listeners and in your case, the congregation.
Yeah, I think the trust that clergy often underestimate the trust level that people have, not only in their congregation, but in them. And I want to say that part of it is, it's not just giving opportunity, but it's being really excited about it. I don't mean false excitement. Like, I'm super excited. Mm-hmm. What I'm telling people is I've never seen a time where it's more fun to be a church than right now, because we are actually reaching out and food is being delivered to the homes of people who have food scarcity. Food is being given to children at a local elementary school when they come for the meal at the school. We're also giving them something for the weekend. And we're honoring all the safe protocols. It's important to keep messaging that and demonstrating that, because if people think you're getting lax on the safety protocols, that lowers trust. Yep. So everything we do has to raise the trust level, but we also created 4 spaces, the way this money is going to be used. And you heard that in what Rosario said. In our context, we're helping people in our own congregation that are hit by economic losses. Our church facilities become a distribution center, as I said. We're helping our nonprofit partners that we've been connected to for years focus their mission on food scarcity right now. And then we help individuals in our community who are being assisted by social workers. And one of the things I've said to our congregation is that it's really unfortunate, but sometimes there are people with bad motives who want to take advantage of churches. So when we connect to our community partners and someone's got a social worker, they've got wraparound services, and we're making the lives of social workers so much easier, because we don't want to just help you in one moment. We want to help you get to a new place. So those have been our 4 priorities. Communicating those clearly and repetitively is really important.
This is so good. The next question is kind of also a practical question in regard to the life within the congregation and finances. And that is, some churches are experiencing financial decline simply because they don't use online portals. And they really do rely on giving in the offering plate. And so because we're not able to meet in person, what would be your advice or just some practical tips to church communities that don't use online or text to give platforms from Sunday to Sunday or from week to week?
I think I would say you need to, because, and just from the standpoint of if we look at what is happening in culture, I mean, 70% of the population today is either Gen Z, millennial, and the smallest of that is Gen X. That means 70% of the population is under 50. And that is a highly mobile-centric, tech-savvy group that's having a significant influence on culture in many, many aspects, but specifically with giving. And so when you look at what's happening, and those numbers are going through the roof, right? So when you look at that and then you compare that to how they want to give, we have, again, very high numbers, almost 70% of those that give in the Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z category, they want to give via mobile. So it's about meeting them where they're at. And even that's kind of the macro level. And then when you look at the micro level of like within the Methodist, community is 40% are also under 50. So it's about meeting people where they are and realizing that it's not just about having a young congregation, it's what that demographic is doing to influence the rest of the generations. And so mobile and online, you need to have that, particularly if people are sitting at home on their couch with that text to give or a scan to give code, you're missing out if you don't have that capability.
I look at it as just multiple on-ramps. And so you can't forsake one and keep the other. So
Right.
you still have to have the ability to mail checks into folk, because some of them have always felt comfortable with that. And you have to, give that option. But again, online mobile app we mentioned. And then if people want to do appreciated stock gifts, real estate, tangible property, life insurance, charitable trust, you have to be able to share that as well. And maybe a good place for that is your website, but being able to encourage multiple avenues for giving and receiving. To go to Tricia's point, I don't carry cash with me. I don't even carry a checkbook. So my wife does, so I have to ask her for money. But I think of myself. And so whenever we've talked about giving in the multiple ways to give, we just encourage people at their comfort level in what they've done. But our congregation, for instance, I would say 50% of what we receive comes online. And I think that's increasing now over time, but it's being able to communicate with folks
Right.
All the time about the multiple ways to give.
Let me just tag on to that because I totally agree with you. It's not about anything replacing. It's about having the widest opportunity to have meet everybody where they're at. And I think that's right on. Some people think, well, if I give up this, I'm going to be alienating. No, you're going to give everybody that, like you said, that on-ramp to be able to be involved and give.
Lisa, one of the things I would say to pastors is you can do this. And there's a voice in your head telling you that you can't learn, you can't do it. And the good thing is companies run by people like Tricia will help you do this. And they already know how to make it easy for you. And I would just say to clergy and to laity who are leaders in our church, think of all the skills you've acquired in about 7 weeks. You've had to learn to do all these things. My dad, who's in his 80s, is adept at Zoom now. I mean, it's remarkable, and he hates technology. But you know what he realized? He either had to check into the technology or he was going to check out of life. If he wants to see his grandchildren, not so much the children, but the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren, he had to check in. And what I want to say to clergy is, you've got to do that same thing with giving right now. And your timeline, some clergy are thinking in a very brief timeline. I want to encourage you to think it's now until the general population is vaccinated. That's your timeline. Well, the truth is, if your timeline is that extended, all of these are things you needed to do anyway. So, make it easy. You've got to have a website. You've got to have a big button on the website that says give here. And that's got to be prominent. And making it prominent is not rude. It's not like you're begging. It's just what everybody's doing. You've got to make it. If I want to attend your church, you have to make it super easy for me. And that's why these multiple platforms that people are talking about are really important. That may be online giving. That may be a text function that makes it really easy, that'll connect to your credit card. that may be a mobile app that your church develops, but you've got to have these things in place right now. And if you're right now saying to yourself, I really don't want to do that, I just want to say, I know none of us do, but it's just what the time requires, because if you don't do it, you'll be checking out. And the truth is the church needs you to check in and be right there for your congregation right now. If you check out, it's a tremendous loss to your community.
This is really helpful because I do know that to varying degrees, certain communities have different access to like digital and online platforms. And so I think just to hear all of these perspectives help pastors to think about how to cultivate generosity even in the midst of their particular context. So I'm just really grateful for kind of the both and, realizing some people are going to want to mail a check-in, other people are going to adapt to a text platform or online giving, but that we just take into consideration the demographics that we pastor, and we're church leaders. That does lead kind of to my next question, which is, are there particular practical financial and budget practices that you think churches should adopt during the midst of a crisis?
I would say during a crisis, it's good to eliminate unnecessary spending. So that's maybe obvious, but some churches or even people personally don't do that. So there's money to be saved when it comes to possibly hospitality. In our case, we meet in a movie theater, and so we're grateful that we don't have to pay rent during this time. I don't have to pay for the hot spots during this time. In the different things that maybe make Sunday morning work, we could take those funds and use them for something else. But I do, to your question, I think communication is huge, and things that we've always done. So we always send out quarterly statements to folks with a letter, casting vision and sharing the wins. We're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to do pastoral care. It's refined our systems right now. This has really tested everybody's systems. And so it's, when people were checking in on people, we're asking them, are they able to view the service? And if not, telling them how. But we continue to do the quarterly statements and then just the casting of vision, because ultimately it's not what we want from people, it's what we want for people. And so if this is a regular part of discipleship, Jesus talks about money more than almost anything else, then there's something to this. But for churches to think entrepreneurial and almost hit the reset button right now, think about ways to reduce costs, not that you're cutting out, you're trimming the fat, you're not trimming muscle. And also how to think differently going forward, as Tom mentioned. This isn't just a lesson we're learning now and we're going to forget about, but what principles do we continue doing when it comes to worship and all that, but also when it comes to stewardship?
What you said and Tom said before is that it's not just about now. The culture has been shifting. We just hadn't really noticed it. And what this has done is made us kind of come face to face with what do we need to do, not only to take care of our church and our budgets and our people now, but it really is the future and how we're going to be communicating as we move forward. And, in terms of budget, one thing that we're seeing that our smaller nonprofits or our smaller churches are saying we don't have the technology to be able to, pay $80,000 or whatever it is. Facebook Live, Instagram Live has been a fantastic solution for them. Particularly bring people on site. If you're a nonprofit, we've been saying, bring them to where you're at, have them see your face. And in terms of the congregation, it's not about the quality of the technology, it's about that connection right now that people still want to be a part of.
Yeah, I really agree with everything that's been said. Thinking about practical financial and budget practices, first, I would make sure you have good data. There are some churches that don't have an awareness of their financial situation at any time. And right now, you really have to have solid data on your giving, how much money we have in the bank, et cetera. So just good data. Also good data on how people are giving. When this started, I went to one of our folks and we were at about 52% of our giving was coming in online. And I said, how can we drive that up to 60? Well, one of the things one tactic was, let's ask people, If we would call you and work on the phone with you to set that up, would that help you? Would you like that? Again, we're not forcing anybody. We just are trying to make it super easy for people, because this technology, it's tricky for a lot of folks. It's tricky for me. My wife's more adept at it than I am. So if you give people help, that's big. I think preserving cash is really big. The question there is, what can we stop doing? We went around our building and just started turning off air conditioning and heating units. We're spending 2/3 of the amount on electricity that we were pre-pandemic. That's data I know. So that type of thing. I would also say lock things up. Pay attention to your physical assets. So we moved. We are a multi-site church, so we had some trucks that we use for that. We push those up right to the front of the building. We don't want anybody stealing anything or damaging or vandalizing. And then finally, I think churches are going to have to think about not a budget reduction, but a budget reset. Mm-hmm. And those are two very different things. And so when you do a budget reset, what you're thinking about is what the other presenters have talked about. I don't think we're going to be using a bulletin for another year and a half. Well, how can I reallocate the person who creates the bulletin into another function? Is that possible? But also, okay, there's no paper supply that we're going to have to use. Now, do we need to reduce or do we need to reallocate? We have found that doing a daily lift, a devotional thing that we do, increases the feeling of connectivity. We've got musicians that are doing weekly tiny concerts, and those are reaching like 800 to 1,200 people every single Friday night. Well, that's obviously something we want to continue doing. So the reallocation is about what are the things you're going to do now that you're learning, because as Tricia said, this has pushed a fast forward button on getting into the culture we're actually in. And I just want to say to clergy who've been doing this for a while, I think it's really exciting. I was talking to a friend of mine who's only about 8 years, maybe 5 years from retirement. He feels like he's got a new lease on ministry right now. And I think if you capture that attitudinal space, it'll drive the behaviors that you'll look on and say, you know what, this is really an exciting time for us.
No, that's so awesome. And Tom, that making it easy part of it, that is such a that's just how we are now. Amazon is like, you click it and in 2 days you have it. Like, we are just programmed now for easy and quick and fast. And so one of the things that we did, we actually did a study with 400 pastors as we were building the technology, and asked them, because to that very point, that's scary. I don't have people, I don't have staff, I don't have to train anybody, what's going on? So, and that's the first thing they said. That was the number one thing, of make it easy. And so, it's a lot of options out there, but definitely don't bring something on that's going to complicate your life. Our problem has to be really, really easy. And that's where consumers are now. That's where people are right now. They have a responsibility to want to give. And so then they're looking for you to make it easy for them to give.
And Tricia, that applies even for people who aren't going to use the technology. So we've got a percentage of our church, they're just not going to do it, which is fine. Like, sure. Don't guilt people, don't beat them up. But how about this? I'll send you a packet of envelopes with the church's address, and they'll be pre-stamped. You don't have to go get stamps. You don't have to figure that out. You can just drop it now in the thing. Make it easy. Think about every age group that you're with. Are they technology averse? Are they technology friendly? How can I help that person do the thing that they want to do to be generous?
Absolutely.
This is so good. I'm very grateful that I didn't have to scribble down the notes, that I can go back to the resources after this episode. You're all really hitting on something, and that is crisis oftentimes cultivates creativity and innovation. It's like when we find ourselves in difficult spots, that's when we start to say, okay, we need new wine and new wineskins. And Rosario, you said something, you used the word entrepreneurial. What practices do you recommend, or have you heard of other churches who are pursuing creative ways of creating revenue for their churches? So, for instance, maybe using your church as a rental space, obviously after quarantine and when we're no longer doing physical distancing. But what are some of the entrepreneurial ways that you believe that churches might be able to lean into once we kind of continue to navigate through the season?
Yeah, it goes back to using your assets. John Wesley said, of course, the world is my parish. But, thinking about where he preached his first sermon and the simplicity of the buildings back then, now we have buildings that, maybe are only used about 32% of the time. And so and they take up a lot of budgeting, with heating and cooling and everything else. So I would look at your assets. What I did in Lexington, we had, when I was there and I planted a church, we then got a church building. We had some unused land. And so we partnered with a Christian developer. We did a $10 million project for mixed use housing. Now, that was because we had this land that we weren't going to use, this parsonage that would have cost a lot for us to fix up. But before you know it, we had 80 units of housing. Some other things that I've done is invite people into our space. Since we had a large building, what does partnerships look like? And I actually learned more about partnerships in space, in being able to utilize space well, from an unlikely source, and that's a brewery in Lexington, an 80,000 square foot brewery, but they had 15 nonprofits meeting in there. And get this, they were actually giving, their profits back to the community. So they were doing a lot of work, maybe more important work than some churches were doing, because they were intentionally reaching to the community. And so it's not about just leasing space or utilizing space, but it's getting people that have a like-minded vision to come and join you. And so for us, it was an after-school program, and then it spawned to a music program as well. And before you know it, we had a few hundred kids coming into our building every day. We were utilizing space we didn't use, but it was getting like-minded partners to join in the work, since we had one of these large older buildings that many of us are familiar with. So the building doesn't have to necessarily be something that's an albatross, but it can be an asset if we're able to leverage it.
If I can just speak to some of the ideas that we've given to some of our nonprofits and churches, and it actually tags on to what you're saying, Rosario, and that partnership aspect. So being really transparent and engaged in the community, one of the things that we've seen is, hey, make a postcard that says what you're doing, and go to some of the local restaurants that have been doing takeout. This has been something that's really been working, and deliveries. Would you be willing to put one of our postcards in here and show that we are a church that is actively raising money in our community to feed people here? Would you be able to include that? Local wants to help local right now. And so we've seen a fantastic response with a lot of the businesses that are still open saying, well, absolutely, yes, we're happy to put your flyer in here, or we're happy to put your postcard in here. And it's just been a way to get additional exposure. But again, that kind of creativity of being able to raise money.
Yeah, I think that's just so important. And Tricia, one of the things that we find with church leaders is they often take that text that says, "Don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing," and they don't want to put anything out there that shows that they're doing something. And I just want to say, I don't think that's the intended use of that text. So we have this community organization that faith communities are all working together. It's called Herndon Cares. We send vulnerable people to local restaurants. And it helps the people that don't have food. It helps the restaurants, keep moving and keep their employees paid. So that helps them from being in a crisis. We made a major gift to that out of our COVID-19 fund. But I said to the person, first, I want to be able to say our congregation, we paid for everybody this week. It's 1,100 people. We want to claim that for our congregation as a joy. Second, I need you to put I noticed that our church's logo is not on your website. I need you to put that up on our website. And I just want you to know we want to be your partner, and we're excited. But I also want the community to see that we're joining with you. And can you make that happen for us? There are some clergy that wouldn't want to do the second half or even the first. And I want to encourage you to resist that instinct that's telling you that lacks humility. It's okay to give Jesus good press. It really is. It's okay for everybody to know that Jesus is driving us to care for the vulnerable, care for the poor, and that's a primary motivator of this community of faith. I would actually argue that if you have cut that out of your budget, you're not a church right now. The church in times of crisis and pandemic has always been the people that went toward the crisis rather than away from it. So if you're sheltering in place on your care of the vulnerable, rethink that. But when you do the work, do it as you just described.
I love that. I just think it's so exciting. This is a very exciting time to be a church or be a nonprofit, and people need to feel motivated right now. They need to feel excited because there's a lot of bad news every single day. And so to have, to encourage the leaders right now, they need you to step up in a way that you haven't stepped up before. They look to you and for you to go, we're going to do this. We're going to make a difference. We're going to be the church that people desperately need that leadership style right now.
This is so helpful. We're going to actually take a quick break, but then we'll come back to continue this conversation. But we want to hear from our sponsors, Amplify Media, as they share with us a bit more about their worship and small group resources. But we'll be back.
Amplify is a space in which Christians can explore their faith more deeply in relationship with one another and be equipped to impact even more people for the gospel. You can even stream your church's services, bringing your congregation together even when they aren't in the same building. Engage your ministry and expand your mission by following these simple steps. Get started with Amplify today.
Well, it's so good to have you back. We are so grateful for our panelists who've been offering some great information. I'm going to launch in with our first question in the second half of this conversation. We're hearing from many congregations that they are actually connecting with people that they would not have otherwise, especially because of our online platforms. We can reach a wide range of individuals who never actually sat in our pews. What would be some of your advice in regards to how you might invite those individuals into your generosity practices, or that they might also become givers?
Kind of looking at a high level that's going to answer that question is, what is it that I need to do to then have the right technology and have the right tools in place? And how do I step into that process? And first of all, is what you're all doing here today is you're reassessing. You're looking at what's worked before, what's not working, what do we need to change, where are the holes? Which leads to, what is it that I need to know? I spoke a little bit about kind of what's happening on a generational standpoint, what's happening in terms of giving. And then what are the tools and technology that I need to be able to then, again, reframe the message? We've been talking a lot about stepping up and not being afraid to ask, but then there's kind of the how. So ZoomGive is a mobile fundraising platform that has two key components to it. One, there's the giving component. We have text to give. We also introduced something called Scan to Give, which is QR code that captures the mobile information as well as text to give and takes to the giving platform, makes it super easy for the younger crowd to just scan. But the bigger thing is the engagement piece, because giving is fantastic and having those tools. But the secret sauce special factor here is, how are you communicating? How are you making people feel a part of your mission? How transparent are you being? They want to come on board with you. We've been talking a lot about that. And so a platform that offers both this text to engage as well as the giving component, where you can actually now tag on, and once a week you're sending to those people, hey, I'm here with my 1 minute of encouragement, to your leaders, to your volunteers. So it is that, a different way of communicating. Email saturation right now. I mean, email opens were 22% before COVID. Now they're like probably 15. We are saturated with messaging. So having that text to engage and engaging your congregation and inviting them into a mobile community is probably one of the biggest things right now. Start there, and then, look for the right solution to be able to put a QR code and a text to give on your sermon next Sunday. I'll just give you one example of a church. They came on right before Easter, and they were like, we don't really know, and we're just going to try this. And so they did. They utilized the text to give and scan to give for 3 weeks. They got 5%, the 5% equivalent of their entire yearly budget, just 3 times. We have another one that stepped up, and they were like, well, we're just going to kind of put our foot in the water here. We're going to email, we have mobile numbers. We don't know, half of them are landlines, half of them aren't, but we're going to actually do a text to engage. We're going to send text messages to them. They haven't even been to our church. Let's just kind of see how they're doing. And within a couple hours, they raised a couple $1,000s. And these people are now back in their mobile community that they can now pastor to, they can now connect to. So there's some fantastic stories that are coming out from this. And it's because, stepping up and not being afraid to take that chance.
I think that if churches want to engage people, if clergy want to engage people, you have to ask. And nothing replaces the ask. And I think that what you just heard Tricia describe, what a time we're in, right? That can happen. That's just remarkable. So you're this close to success. That's part of what the message I want to give. A lot of people feel like they've fallen off a cliff when actually you're about a half an inch from success with the right behaviors. And one of those behaviors will be how you ask. So when we went to a different type of worship, we've done live stream worship for a long time, but it was you looking into our sanctuary. Now we've moved up to, for lack of a better phrase, sort of studio worship, which is the camera is about 12 feet away from where I'm standing. And I'm looking into the lens of a camera. I'm not looking out on a congregation full of people. That type of worship is new and different. And during that, I found large churches were better suited to make that jump because they had some of that technology in place. Smaller churches are going to benefit during reopening. Smaller churches will be able to reopen in person faster than most large churches. But during this in-between time, you've got to say to people, here's what you might do. Here's one ask. First, if you're attending our live stream, but you attend a church that's in your community, I want you to still give to that church in your community. So demonstrate your own generosity. And the reason is people like that. And it's sincere. I'm not spinning it. I want them to support their own church. Second, some of you are former members. I understand. I've gotten some email, and this is true. I've gotten some email from some of our former members who never found a church when they moved. And during this COVID pandemic, they're coming back to us. Hey, I want to encourage you to feel free to donate just as you used to. And here's how. Third group, you may be new to Flourish United Methodist Church and you may not have a church home. If that's the case, you may want to share of our ministry. You may want to do the good things you hear me describing. If that's the case, I want to invite you to give. So those are 3 examples of 3 asks that you can make. But notice one of them, I'm not asking you to give to me. I'm asking you to give to the church in your community. So if you keep that balance up, people will know that you're not somebody who's just going after their money. And that is really important in this time, just to make sure that you're being clear, you're being transparent, but you're not in it for the cash.
And to Tom's point and Tricia's point, I would say all this has to be couched in who you are as a church, in your DNA. So don't try to, I love what Tom's saying. And if I try to copy and paste what Tom's doing, it's not going to work in my context. So I can take those principles, I can tweak them and talk to our leaders and see how might this look in our context, because the tendency is to just copy and paste instead of working in our Indigenous setting and figuring out, okay, this is how God is directing me, but it's based on our wiring and DNA. So just like every Christian is called to, spread the good news, right? But each Christian has different giftings. I think the same thing is true with churches. Churches have unique anointings upon them. And so functioning in your call as a church is going to help you with these practices and figuring out who you are. So, for instance, I love this, but Jimmy Fallon has been doing his show from his house. He's not changing his humor at all. He's just changing the context, but he's uniquely him, as Jimmy can, incorporating family and his kids, but it's functioning in who he is instead of being somebody else. And so, the modes or methods or wineskins may change, but the message doesn't.
There's one creative, I love this one church is doing, and it's, churches have talent shows a lot. And like what you're saying, Rosario, is like, make it yours, make it your culture, right? So they've incorporated a text to donate to perform, I think is what they're calling it. And so they're having a talent show online. It's like an Instagram type thing. And so they're inviting their congregation to donate to perform. And then they're inviting all of their friends and family on socials to watch. And what's interesting about that is that they're bringing this exposure to just the church, because all their family and friends are opting in from everywhere in the United States. And so it's giving this new exposure to the church. There's a donation ask because it's specifics to something they're going to do in their community. And so again, it's that creativity of like, this is who we are. You know, we always have a yearly talent show, but now we're going to do it online, and now we're going to invite people, and now we're going to make an ask. And they've been really, they saw success with that, which is also really fun. So it's that creativity.
Tricia, I'm going to just maybe lob a question to you, and then we'll have our other panelists maybe to fill in a little bit. But with your experience with nonprofits, what are some maybe inspiring ideas from nonprofit kind of financing and also fundraising habits that you think that churches could benefit from?
The most important thing that we are telling all of them is, in this time right now, you need to get people into a mobile community. Emailing, all of that, you can email them, have them opt in, and can tell you all about that. That's too technical for this part, but getting them into a mobile community where you can text and engage with them, that's the most important thing, because now you've got the ability to rise above all the other stuff that's happening, all the other communication, and really come straight to them and have them really understand, this is our mission, this is what we're going to do, here's what we're doing this week, and get them excited, engaged, and cast that vision. So that mobile community is very, very important. And, the other thing is just, I believe so much in this because we've seen so much success, is don't be afraid to take on a new technology. In fact, we really just wanted to help nonprofits and churches. And we're like, you know what, we're just going to waive our whole subscription for the year. We just want to get people making money now. We just want you to fundraise now and be set up for the future. So I think that other thing is that we've been talking about is being able to take that chance. I think what we see in the nonprofit and the church community a lot is that reticence, that either it's going to be scary, it's going to be complicated, or it's not going to really work with their constituents. And all of those things, once they put this technology into place and put these capabilities into place, it really just opens the door. So I think the two big things is invest in your community, get them engaged, and then get ready to step up to try something that's really going to change everything about your fundraising. I know I keep drilling back to that, but it's because we've seen so much success. Kind
of before our break, Tricia was kind of sharing some practical ideas I think that churches might also want to take on. And I want to just give you the opportunity while you're kind of sharing these inspiring ideas to maybe give us some of those practical tips that you think are just so important for churches to keep or to have in their DNA. So you're looking, I think what you're asking is you're looking for some specific type ideas. Yeah. So one is, I already mentioned, is whenever you have any type of online communication, whether it's a church service or a Wednesday, or Thursday, or whatever your gathering is, always offer the opportunity for giving on your screen. We have one big network church, very similar to yours, and every single time they meet, there is a URL to donate, there is a text to give, and now there's the scan to give. Having other things online, like I've already mentioned, the talent show, contests, getting online, getting on Facebook to augment what you're doing, really just getting your church very involved in the community. I think that's the other thing we draw back to is community is making sure that your church constituents know that this isn't just about keeping lights on. So really it's that messaging. And I think it's like, there's a lot of little tools that we can talk about, but it's the big rocks that really matter, is helping them understand that we're involved with the community. We're partnering with these guys here to do X. We need you to give this week. This is our goal. Goal setting has been very important. It's when we see nonprofits kind of like, we want to raise money for something larger. We want to raise something this week. We need to do something this month. This is our goal. That gets people excited. That brings them, okay, this is something that has to happen right now. So a little bit of that deadline aspect too is there are people in need today. You've seen the news. So I know that I'm not getting as specific perhaps, but those are the big ideas of let them know, ask, and give the ability to.
Lisa, one of the things that I think is really important that I've learned from nonprofits is that they communicate a lot. And this gets back to what Rosario said at the very beginning. It really is about casting a compelling vision, but it's also about access to that vision. So one of the things that we're going to start tonight, which I wish I would have started 3 weeks ago, is we're going to do a Facebook Live event that's going to be a Q&A with the pastor. And they can send in any question they want about what's happening, my thoughts on things. We're probably going to do it for about 30 minutes. And I think it's really important to give people access to information sources that they're looking for, because they're making donor decisions even when they're not really thinking that way. If we've got to be an organization that they trust, we've got to be highly transparent, and we've got to be we have to have a message about our mission and be on message as we go. So I think that is really, during other times of crisis, when you look historically, great leaders always increase the communication cycle. So Churchill during World War II, Roosevelt during the Depression, people find ways to get with other, with their constituents to say, hey, here's what's going on, here's where we're at. And I think for us, this connects to being sort of a leadership presence. Really good nonprofits make sure that their constituents understand that in their field, they're a leadership presence. And it's not self-aggrandizement, it's security. And we're in a time where we are seeing in different states and in different venues a different leadership presence. And I'm finding that what people are looking for is a leadership presence that tells them the Lord has not abandoned us, and God's with us at this time, and not just with us, but with the whole world. We care for each other, and here's how we're doing that. We're called to care for our community. Here's how we're doing that. And we're going to have a deeper experience of our faith in Christ because of this pandemic. And in the church, your church is going to help you do that. So that's very different from what Tricia's sharing, but these two things work together. Being on point on the message and the communication enables people then to go into the spaces where they're going to be, where you make it easy for them.
Absolutely. And it is, like what you're saying is, make them feel that they are part of a mission. They are not just part of a church. They are part of a movement. They're part of something that is alive and dynamic. That is, again, that excitement factor that people are craving right now, and something that should be sustained. We should always feel like this. We are a church. We get to do amazing things for God. And so if we've kind of stepped back from that and we've gotten in a little bit of our groove, it's time to really get excited again.
We give them a contrast statement sometimes. And what I've said is, I know right now it feels like church evaporated, but actually the church is just deployed. And I got that deployed language from someone else. I don't know who first said that, but I use it all the time that I can, because I want them to have that sense of a mission that we're on right now.
This is so good. You've all kind of touched on this a little bit, but what are some words of hope that you might offer up to church leaders in regards to the continued impact they can have on the community? So it's not just simply that we want people to be generous to keep lights on or staff, although that's incredibly important, but also too in regards to our community partnerships and a community impact. What would you suggest to church leaders in regard to their giving?
I want to hear what Rosario is going to say today. I don't want to talk over anybody, but I'm really would like to hear what he's going to say.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say to church leaders right now, we have an unprecedented time to share the light of the world with everybody we encounter. And the church is not closed, as Tom said, it's being deployed. And so we're able to multiply our impact in ways that we haven't done in this generation. And so when we share about those stories, let's not be afraid to do that, but let's proclaim just the good works that are happening in our community. And so I would tell leaders to start small. Think big, but start small. Just do something. And so if you don't know where to start, you don't have a huge budget, and you want to start maybe a small fund, go for it. Whatever it is to partner and to be able to contribute to the community, just start something. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to cost a lot, but it encourages folks to be active. And so that's what I would tell leaders, not to be afraid, but just do something and see how God ends up multiplying it. I mean, we look at the story of the feeding of the 15 to 20,000. It started with, 5 loaves and 2 fish. It multiplied, but it took Philip saying, hey, there's a boy and his lunch. So let's not be afraid to look at what we already have and say, wait a minute, maybe there's something we can do here. It may not be huge, but let's just see how God multiplies it for impact.
If I can just tag on to that multiplication aspect, something that we all know is pretty amazing is that we've got people watching and being, coming to you in ways that they never have. I would never go into a church, but I'm willing to watch you online. And so that multiplication aspect, that invite to the congregation of, let everybody let everybody that you know be a part of this congregation. Just check it out online. Here's the link. Here's the YouTube. Here's the whatever. And so again, like the numbers of multiplication of how many people you can actually bring into your congregation during this time, who may be, not part of a congregation. This is a great opportunity. And then there's some numbers there. There's some opportunity for donating. There's some opportunity for giving. So I think that's one level of encouragement, is get your people out there as you've deployed them. Now they're in the field, get them to bring more people in.
Lisa, one of the things I'm observing is that for a lot of clergy, these new skills, it's not just about using your mind to acquire the skill, it's about overcoming the psychological piece. Mm. I think that video-based services that we're offering today, whether it's live stream worship or prayer times in the evening or a Zoom prayer time, devotions, etc., is to many of United Methodist clergy today what field preaching was to John Wesley. That's a tactic that televangelists use, and we considered it too vile for our purposes. But now we're all in this together, and what the clergy that are stepping into this, and I've got friends in churches where it's them in their home study with a camera, a cell phone. So it's not complicated. It's Facebook Live, but they're doing it, and I'm just so proud of that. Like I'm so proud of friends of mine who don't have a bunch of resource and staff and everything else, and they're stepping into it. So first, do that. Like just do it. Just offer it. Give your best and see what God gives back. Because I think if you do it as an offering to the Lord, and you overcome your own fears about, am I going to do it right? Or friends, none of us knows if we're doing it right. We're just doing it. And eventually you're going to get the feedback, and you can seek feedback from people. Put a little survey out there and find out. You'll also just notice how many people are actually tuning in and whether that number is going up or it's going down. That's a big help, and the analytics are there and many of the services that you use. The other thing I'll say is ask for help. I think what Rosario said is so true. Like, you can't cookie cutter things. But what you can do is you can say, wow, is that a framework I can use? Mm. So we have the sermon series we're doing right now, and our children's director said, you know what, I'm going to develop something called Camp Together. And she developed a curriculum that's essentially a at-home vacation Bible school that you do with your family. Well, for a lot of families, that type of family discipleship, what a resource. So she put that together. We mail them things every week. We do other things on Nearpod online. That's gone to 14 states and Canada now. And then I've had some clergy who have noticed it, and they said, hey, is there any way I could get that? Absolutely. We're going to send you everything you want, and it's all free. And I know you're not going to do it the way I did it or the way we did it. You're going to do it the way you want to do it. But think about how we've accelerated the work by giving you all those frameworks, and you're not investing in the time of the person putting the curriculum together. You might just take that children's resource and use it wholesale. So my point is, there are people around you, and if you ask for help, it's a time where people are generous to give.
I do want to thank our panelists again in regard to them speaking into this place that many of us as church leaders are worried and concerned. And just a reminder again that we do serve a God who is generous. And so even in the midst of a very loud narrative of scarcity, that we know that, God's provision is to the overflow, and that we might be able to lean into that even in a season that is so difficult, that maybe God is going to show us the immeasurably more. So I want to thank our panelists for helping us maybe just to feel a little more grounded and anchored in that reality that the God that we serve is a God of the immeasurably more. We do want to let you know about our next episode, which will be on self-care. As church leaders, we're on the front lines of kind of helping people to feel spiritually whole and well, but that also means that we have to care for ourselves if we're going to care for others in a way that we do so from an overflow and not from a deficit. And so we do hope that you will be a part of this webinar series to to watch that episode. You can find more information, the notes and the resources from this particular episode on amplifymedia.com/now and next. You can find all of our resources from this particular conversation, and you can also register for our next episode. And we do hope that we will have you with us again to hear that wonderful information about self-care. I do, just as we close our time together, want to invite all of you to ask yourself this question, and that is, where are you finding hope? And that in the midst of what can feel like a wilderness experience for us, that we can recognize that God also comes with that joy, unspeakable joy, like manna that gives us just enough to make it for another day. Thanks so much for being with us.